I'm Ashley. Thanks for joining us at Atlassian Team Talks. In this session, you'll hear from Dave Caro, a continuous delivery advocate at Split. He'll show you how to use Jira and Split for progressive delivery. Welcome, Dave.
Hi, yes, I am Dave Caro, and I'm really glad to join you today. We are going to talk about how Pac-Man taught me to love progressive delivery. Before we start, though, we need to set the context. Why are we having this conversation? Why is this important? So I want to ask you three questions. And the first one is, do you do this when your team releases to production? We have lots of advanced tools, but do you still kind of worry? You kind of, I hope it goes okay when you actually push code live? And can you remember a release night that went like this, where you get partway into it and you realize, oh, I see impending doom. Like, this is not going well, right? And I'm not coming home for dinner, and maybe I'm not coming home till morning, right? Not a lot of fun, but we've probably all been through it once or twice. And finally, do you feel like this when someone asks you whether a release made a difference? You know, you put all this work into one or more sprints and you release something all the way to production, and well, it didn't crash, we don't have incidents, but did it really move the business forward? Do you know? And so you're kind of unsure, right? Well, it doesn't have to be like that. Your day-to-day can be actually something more like this, which it's possible to actually build psychological safety into your tooling so that it's not just a blameless postmortem and being nice to each other, but how do you build into your tooling greater psychological safety? And how do you also build in the ability to know the impact your release makes so you're more likely to have pride of authorship? And finally, can you actually set yourself up to be able to take bigger risks safely so that you can take bigger bets without feeling like you're risking the business? Turns out that these things are possible and people are doing these already simply by changing the way you release. And that is what progressive delivery is really all about. So we'll take just a minute to define progressive delivery, and then we'll get into that demo of Split and Jira using Pac-Man, and then we'll unlock how safety and pride of authorship can be made possible through the use of data, and we'll wrap up the session with Q&A and some resources for where you can learn more. Let's define progressive delivery. So Carlos Sanchez is a senior cloud software engineer at Adobe, and he put this kind of line by line in a way that's really, I think, an effective way to look at progressive delivery. It's not just gradually rolling things out, but it's how you go about it. So let's look at his definition. Progressive delivery is the next step after continuous delivery, where new versions are deployed to a subset of users. That's really important, a subset, not everybody all at once, not a big bang, and are evaluated in terms of correctness and performance. So not just like a QA kind of testing, but is it actually performing? Is it fast as it should be? Is it actually accomplishing the business purpose it was meant to accomplish? And you do this before rolling it out to the totality of the users. Again, this is a subset of users. So how do I expose my code to not everybody and learn something valuable before I decide whether to roll it out to everyone? And in some circumstances, I might roll it back if it doesn't match some key metrics. So let me ask you, if you know that a release that you started rolling out triples the latency on a user experience, are you just going to want to keep rolling it out? Or are you going to say, you know what, let's try to address that before we roll it out, right? So it depends on your own environment and what your criteria are, but how much more powerful is it to actually stop a rollout early on and address issues rather than have it be a fire you're fighting for hours or days afterwards? So we'll make this a little more real now by moving into a demo. Well, let's actually use these concepts with the Pac-Man game. Okay, great. So here we have the Split Pac-Man over here. And just to get familiar with the game, I'll fire it up. Most of you probably played this before. You have Pac-Man trying to avoid the ghosts. If I hit that, they turns into a different mode. I'm actually going to get deliberately caught here so I can show you. Well, actually, you can see what I wanted to show you, which is that they're not really chasing me. Check it out. So see how they're just kind of randomly moving around? That is chill mode, which is they're just kind of randomly roaming around. And we're imagining that we run an arcade or an arcade network, and we want it to be a little harder because we want it to be challenging, and we want people to use more credits, right? And so we've launched this story called Radar Mode, Chase Pac-Man to make game harder. And I can see it's broken down into several subtasks, and we've already done this sort of refactoring task here. And next one up is to implement chase logic in ghosts.js. It says, as a user, I want the ghost to chase after me so the game is not too easy. So it says when being chased by ghosts, radar will appear at the bottom of the screen. And you can see that right here. Ghosts, it says chill, it's going to say radar. And it says, let's wrap this feature in a split called Pac-Man radar ghost. So the first thing I'm going to do is create a flag called Pac-Man radar ghost. And once you've integrated Split in Jira, you'll always have this over here in the releases. And I'm going to say, I want to create a feature flag. I'm going to give it the name, and I'm going to select a traffic type. In Split, we have different traffic types for keeping track of things. We can explain that later in the Q&A. I'm going to choose user for now and go ahead and create this. So if we go back over here and we refresh this guy, save that and refresh it, we'll see that in the release field over there, we've now got, Pac-Man radar ghost. And if I click on that, we get a dialog that tells us the status is off and rollout is disabled. And what this means is that at the moment, it's not being actively used for a release. Technically, what's happening behind the scenes is there's no targeting rule in Split yet. This flag exists, but there's no rule telling it what to do, right? Let's fix that, because our goal is to give the development team the ability to play with this in production. So I'm going to click on the name of the flag. It'll take me back into Split, just to the right place. I'll click Add Rules. And by default, when you create a split, you have an on and an off treatment. Those are the states it can be in. These could have other names if you want. And by default, it's also 100% off. So no one gets this in the on state by default. And what we want to do is actually say, hey, for the team, and I've got a team that I've created under something called a segment. Oh yeah, hang on, I want to leave the screen. Yeah, let's create this first. So I've got a team called Arcadia team, and I'll commit that, and then I'll show you how that works. Every time you save a change in Split, you're going to get a diff, right? And this should look familiar to you as a developer. Green lines mean something's added. Red lines mean things are removed. And down here, it says add approvers. If you wanted to, you can have Split handle peer review for you, or even handle approvals where you have to have an approval to move forward. In this case, we're not going to do that. I'm just going to say this is pre-prod. I'm going to confirm it. Now, if we come over here where the dev team is logged in as Raj, you can see that, boom, we're in radar mode, right? It happened right away. And I just wanted to quickly show that segment. So segment is just a list of users. So in this case, the Arcadia team has a few users on it, right? So let's assume we've just kind of moved on in life, and we're sort of living in our Jira world, right? And we've accomplished this task of implementing the logic and getting it out to prod so that the dev team can play with it. So we're going to mark this guy done. Right, and we're going to go back to our story and see what's next. So the next one is release to users and start banking more coins. And so let's take a look at what's in there. It says, let's release to the free play users first since they don't burn credits. So you've ever been in an arcade where it's in a party mode and they've turned the coin boxes so you don't have to put quarters in, you can just push the button. That's what's going on here. These users have that unlimited credits, right? And plan split name is Pac-Man radar ghost, but you can look in that task to be sure. This part I want to focus on. It says, first, we're going to go to the free play group, and then we're going to roll out to 10% of our production users as a canary test. Then we're going to go to 50% as an A/B test, and we'll learn about more why that's interesting in a bit. And then maybe we'll stop at 80% and ride it through a peak traffic period to make sure that we don't surface an issue that only happens when there's a preponderance of users, right? And then go to 100% and mark it done. So the cool thing about having this integrated with Split is that I want to track this flag as part of this release. So I'm just going to, I don't have to create it now. I can actually just connect it to this task. And it'll give me a list of the splits in my environment. I'll connect Pac-Man radar ghost. And now if I were on the Split side of things, under additional settings, we can see which Jira tasks, this is kind of the bidirectional aspect of this, right? I can see which Jira tasks are connected to the Split, who owns them, and what the status is. So remember, we finished that coding, and we're now in this rollout stage, right? So let's see how we would do that, right? Our goal now is to get it to that free play population. And if I go over here, I can see that the way free play works is it's an attribute of the app called Coinbox mode. And as long as the app is sharing that attribute with the Split SDK, then your targeting rules can use it to expose the code or not, right? And I'll come down here to targeting rules and I'll add a rule. And I'll say if the attribute Coinbox mode matches an item in a list which includes free play, serve the on experience, right? Save that. Now we can see the diff is just showing us we added a few things. And I'll say that this is external beta and confirm it. And if we go over there, we can see, boom, they're in radar mode now. All right, so we're doing our progressive delivery. We started with testing in production with the dev team being able to use it. We've now expanded that to be this free play mode, people to let them use it. And things are going well, actually. Everything's so far so good. So the next step, remember, was we were going to go to 10%. So the way we do that is we go down here to set the default rule, and we'll change this to be a percentage, and we'll say we want this to be 10% on. And Split has a fairly sophisticated randomization, and the beauty part about that is that not only are we going to get 10% of the population, but it's sticky. So if a user comes through and they're bucketed between 0 and bucket 9, they're going to get the on experience. If they come back an hour later, they're not going to get rebucketed. They're going to still be in whatever bucket they were in. Now, if they came in the first time and they were in bucket 12, they would have it off. And as soon as you move this up to, say, 50% or 30%, they're going to be on. You're with me? So I'm going to go ahead and let that be 50. I'm going to save that. And I want to show you something before we, I should make the status on that. I'm going to make the status on that guy experimenting, because we're now going to be in a 50-50 stage, right? But what I want to just show you before we leave here is that this targeting rule screen is really straightforward. There's the possible conditions it could be, and then everything below that is evaluated in the order that you scroll down. And so the first thing that's going to be evaluated is whether they're on this white list, which will probably be renamed allow list pretty soon. And then there's targeting rules, and then there's default rule. And so once there's a match, you're out of the decision and it's served, right? And so it's pretty easy to understand how this works. And the targeting rules can actually be complex. You could have multiple entries in the targeting rules here if you want. So let's say we're rolling along and everything seems fine, and suddenly there's an alert and people think there's something wrong and that we're the cause of it and we're not really sure. And so something's going wrong and you're thinking, oh boy, I better go back and let's say you're back in the Jira world, right? And you're so literally a couple clicks, right? I'm going to click the flag name. I'm going to click it here, and I'm right into Split where I need to be, and I'm right by the kill button. And I'll go in here and I'll type kill. And now I've killed it. And what that means is that we've instantly gone back to chill mode everywhere. But one nice thing about kill is that it's frozen our configuration. So we didn't delete all these rules. We still have all the rules in there. And it turns out that we weren't the problem. It was DNS, right? So it's always DNS. So something went wrong with DNS. It's been fixed, and we could restore now. We would just basically click restore, change the status to be experimenting again, and all good. Plus DNS and restore. And so now we're back. So kind of covered a lot of things as we've gone through this demo, but I just wanted to see that you have, first of all, you have instant control of how the app behaves. You can progressively roll out. And if something goes wrong, you can kill in an instant. And we'll learn more about why sort of the 50-50 and other levels are really interesting later in the talk, but that's a demo for now. Okay, so what did we do there? Well, obviously we decoupled deploy from release. Using feature flags, we were able to control the exposure not through a deployment, but just through the feature flag. We were able to dial exposure up and down. We dialed it up and down depending on what we were trying to accomplish. We wanted to first see how it looked, and then we started rolling it out to people, right? And we rolled it back when we realized it was not okay. And we saw flag status in Jira, and we saw issue status in Split. So no matter what your sort of day-to-day interface is, you could see information you needed to see, even though you're working in this different world of progressive delivery. But what did we not do? We never did a redeploy. We didn't actually push new code. We didn't push new config. We just changed the settings in the feature flag system, and that changed what was happening in the field in production on the fly. which is why we didn't have to do a rollback. When we realized things were not going well, we didn't have to plan how we were going to push code around or bring up new servers or revert or roll forward. There was none of that, right? We just made the switch. And that's why there was no war room. We didn't have to gather, 4 different disciplines and figure out what was the safest path to get back to a good place, right? We just flipped the switch and we were good for now. So based on that, let's talk about how that sort of basis of those things we're able to do there actually unlocks safety and pride of authorship when we've got data that's coming in along with those experiences. What does that unlock for us? What happens? And I want to open this again with a couple of questions. And the first one is, how would you feel if this happened to you often? There's something happening there. The dark bar is when software was rolled out to 100% of users. And we can see the latency skyrocketed and throughput dropped to the floor, and it's not good. And there's probably a lot of people that are unhappy. Whether this is a full-blown outage or just a degraded service, kind of up to you, but not good, right? So if this happened every time you did a release, or at least often enough when you did releases, how would you react as a human? Well, you'd be less inclined to do releases, right? You want to do them less often, but we're trying to do releases more often. And so how do we make that safer? How would you feel instead if you could find problems here? So that lighter bar is actually when the software was rolled out to 5% of the users. And the problem in this graph is that it's along with the ambient noise. You can't really see anything going wrong at that 5% mark because it looks like kind of the noise on the graph before the rollout happened. So think about it, 5% of your users, a problem would have to be 20 times bigger than normal to show up in your global graphs. Like if you're looking at the overall normal graphs, the problem would have to be huge to show up, right? How do we fix that so that we can do progressive delivery, but actually not lose visibility? It's handy to have a step function like this. You're like, whoops, something's wrong. We got to back that out, right? But how can we actually benefit from knowing early on that something's going wrong before it hurts a lot of people? And the answer is to use scientific method, right? It's to use statistics, and I'll show you how this works. So imagine you want to track those timings, the errors, et cetera, the kind of the stuff has to do with the system performance, but you also want to track business performance. Is this thing on target? Is this accomplishing what we hope to accomplish? And you've got a population of users that you want to figure this out with, right? So the way we do this is we deliver, as in the previous example, 95% of the users are going to get the existing experience. And 5% of the users are going to get the new experience. And we're going to track those timings and errors and those business performance for each of these groups separately. And so we plot out the people who went through the existing experience during this time period, their behavior and the system behavior fell along this distribution. And then we're going to do the same thing for the people who went through the new experience. Now, what's beautiful about this is that if these are randomly assigned, then you can assume that all of the inputs otherwise are equal. Marketing campaigns are influencing them equally. News is influencing them equally. The weather, a pandemic, whatever. They're all getting the same inputs other than the thing you changed for which code path you sent them down, right? And because we can see this happening as it's rolling out, we can do smart things like if those curves are lined up on top of each other, it means 2 things. 1, nothing's wrong, and 2, we didn't really make an impact, right? Let's assume that those are out of sync in this picture because performance is out of whack, right? And so what we might want to do is automate this, which is an alert, which lets you know, hey, by the way, everything seems to be fine maybe, but you're violating one of your rules, like your performance is slower or you're getting more errors, right? And then to be able to kill that feature flag right away. And what happens when we take this approach, when this is always on and just working for every time you push code, then this is where we unlock those things, right? So feature flags and data, they unlock that psychological safety. And let's look at that. So one of the things you get when you're able to work this way is incremental development for flow. So you can actually push smaller bits of code more often, and you're not afraid of doing more releases more often because it's got your back, right? You're covered. You can also do testing in production. So you can push code all the way to production, but have it be off for your users and validate it in the production environment with production data before you overexpose it to the first user. And probably best of all, if you're a developer, is the kill switch, right? A big red button you can push that just instantly stops the pain. So you don't start a war room, you just stop the exposure, and then you figure out what needs to happen, right? In terms of how are we going to address this issue. But you can actually stop the exposure of that code to new users in an instant. Now, the next thing this unlocks is what I call pride of authorship or pride of ownership, right? So you're working through a sprint for a reason. There's some objectives you've been asked to accomplish. You need to do this and do that and do this other thing. And hopefully they're to accomplish some goal, right? Well, it's nice to be able to know whether you met that goal. And the problem is if you're just doing releases to check boxes and go on to the next release, you're stuck in what I would call iteration without data, which is kind of a feature factory. It's like you're kind of stuck in a world where you're just releasing for release's sake, and it's demoralizing. It's kind of, you're just kind of, I hate to say it, but you're kind of like dumb labor, just kind of turning the crank, right? But we want to be craftsmen and we want to actually do things that make a difference. That's why we're here. So if you have direct evidence of your efforts, it's more likely to lead to pride. And this even works in the reverse direction. If you do a release and it breaks things or makes metrics worse, it should hurt. And you should put your heads together and say, how can we make this better? Then you make it better. And then you can go home saying, wow, we made that better. As opposed to, I don't know if it helped. And I think some people made it worse. You know, living in a world of facts and data that help you actually own what you do and take pride in it. And then finally, taking bigger risks in a safe way, right? So test to learn is the idea of how do I actually run tests to actually learn something I don't already know? And my point is here that that's better than being driven by ego or hippo. Now, ego, you're familiar with that. It's somebody's, you know, really feels strongly about this and it's part of their identity. They want you to do this because whatever. But hippo, you may not know, stands for highest paid person's opinion. So how many times have you been in a room where there's the highest paid person feels like they've got to state a preference for what we ought to do here, but they don't have the data and maybe not even the technical background to understand what the choices entail, right? How much better would it be to actually run a test, learn something, and then inform the hippo's opinion with data? Another thing to bear in mind is that people will see A/B testing or experimentation and they'll think, oh, well, I don't want to have to do 2 of everything. I don't want to have to do multiple copies. I don't want to burn, 2 story points on getting this done. And that's a big misnomer because what you're doing, as we showed in that previous example, is you're comparing existing to the new thing you're going to do anyway. So you're not actually building additional copies of code. You're just, as you're laying in the new code, you're comparing it to the legacy most often. Now, sometimes you actually want to try multiple things. You might call that ABN testing, right? And there are things like dynamic config, which are your friend. Dynamic config takes advantage of feature flags to roll out parameters which would be fed into something. Like Speedway Motors was rolling out they have a system that does recommendations, and it's a third-party recommendation engine, right? But it takes parameters. There's multiple things they can feed into it. Maybe it should prioritize recent sales. Maybe it should prioritize profitability. Maybe it should prioritize popularity, whatever the criteria are, right? And they wanted to be able to change those settings and see how users would behave, right? Maybe they need more results or fewer results. So dynamic config lets you actually send those parameters out along with the feature flag. And then changing those parameters is just a matter of changing the feature flag, not doing a new deployment, not even just a deployment to change a config. We're kind of used to the situation, well, we're going to push a new config to the server, which changes this, this, and this. Well, sometimes that might still be appropriate, but when you're trying to test how different users behave to things, being able to send 3 different configs to 3 different groups of users and watch how they react is way more powerful. You're also doing this in parallel instead of like, a week at a time. And then finally, painted door is greater than wasted effort. And a painted door is just a situation where you expose a new feature just as its affordance, as the appearance of the feature. And then if somebody clicks on it, it doesn't actually have a back end behind it. It would just put up a message saying, hey, either an error, or it would say, hey, so glad you're interested in this feature, but we're just gathering interest in this, so glad you like it, whatever, right? That's called painted door. And instead of building a whole thing and putting it on the shelf, I've done this more than once where I spent 6 months working on something and ended up on the shelf. It's not much fun. So why waste all that effort to build all the back-end logic when you could first test to see if there's interest in the feature? And finally, this is what no release nights looks like. So this is a graph that our CTO, Pato Echagwe, put together in a blog called On a Mission to Kill Release Nights. And this is literally the hours of a work day. And 7.5 is 7:30 in the morning, et cetera, right? And you'll notice that these bars are when people made changes to feature flags to control releases to either cause them to roll out or roll back, move up, move down, whatever. And you'll notice that they're happening during the working hours, and they even take a little bit of a break there around lunchtime, right? There's no big spike in the late night hours when supposedly nobody's online, right? This is what no release lights looks like. And this is actually a plot of people who are using Split, for example, to control the release of their software. So I know I covered a lot of material there, but I kind of wanted to expose you both to the fundamentals of what is the purpose of delivery and how do I decouple deploy from release, but then also, well, why would I do this and why does this unlock higher value really frankly, quality of life for me as a developer or a dev lead or even a manager, right? So I'm going to put up, let's move to the QA and where to learn more stuff. And I'm going to put up some links here. And while I check my notes and see what's come in during the talk on the questions, go ahead and maybe put some of those short links into your browser, a couple tabs, so you'll have that stuff handy. And then let me see what we have so far in terms of questions. Okay, lots of good questions. So the first one here is a question about where do I put flags, and what about the overhead of adding flags and removing flags? Doesn't this add extra, maintenance burden to me to have to do this, right? Which is a great question. There's a blog post that one of our developers at Split wrote called, let me think, Manage Feature Flags Efficiently in JavaScript, and we'll put the link in the chat if we can drag it out for you. But really the bottom line is we used to do feature flagging kind of wherever we thought the decision needed to be made in the code. And then we realized over time that actually abstracting at a higher level made huge benefits in terms of being able to separate concerns and be able to pull pieces out without the other pieces knowing that a change has been made. So give that a read. It's called Manage Feature Flags Efficiently in JavaScript. And whether you're coding in any language, the model he's proposing there works great. Okay, so just really look for the natural breaks in your code and decide at the module level, not like deep down line by line. The second question is kind of related, which is testing. How do I test both sides or all the sides of a feature flag? Do I need multiple environments to do that? And actually the beauty of feature flags is it's the reverse from that. You can actually test all the permutations in one environment. And the way you do that is by overriding the value of the flags. And there are a few different ways to do this. If you're testing a front end, you can probably use cookies or actually headers and requests. There's a variety of ways to do this. Check the links I gave you, and happy to follow up with others if they have more specific questions. But the short answer is it's possible to actually fix the value of a flag. Each test basically becomes the user that gets a certain experience. And so you have different test personas, another way to solve this problem. But you can run, one of our customers was saying, wow, I can run my new stuff and my regression in the same environment at the same time, literally at the same moment in time. So in terms of parallel, I can test. It's very cool. Another question was about mobile apps. So can I use this with mobile apps? I have this delay where things go through the App Store. How can I use this? And actually, again, if we take a look at what's happening, if you wrap each change you're making in your code behind a feature flag and then go through the multi-day or multi-week process to get it through the store and out to production, the flags are there and you can make changes. The moment that comes out of the store and people start downloading that app, you've got instantaneous control over whether to expose a feature or not, all the way down to the user by user level, user, geography, any demographics you know. So it gives you much more control. So if there's something that slips through, gets all the way through the App Store, but it's bad, you can turn it off and rest easy while you work on getting the next version through the App Store. And then another question on metrics. This idea of using data makes a lot of sense, but which metrics should I be using? We have a huge analytics store. Where do I start? So what I would say is a small number of metrics that align with what's most important to your company is the kind of stuff you want to start with, right? You want to actually have the key metrics that you care about, whether it be performance metrics or business metrics. And those metrics are typically derived from a series of events. You probably have an event stream which says user did this or the user did that or the system behaved this way. The way in Split events work is we ingest events, and then you can derive metrics from those events, and you can derive multiple metrics from one set of events, right? And so the raw events come in with lots of properties. You then choose to build metrics off those properties with filtering, with conditions, et cetera. And what's cool about that is as long as you're ingesting that data, you can actually look at those metrics and create those metrics on the fly and even after a period of time and use them retroactively as long as the events were ingested during the exposure to the users. So that's probably a lot of content. I want to remind you the links on the page here. I think you should grab these links, particularly the ones that most interest you, whether you want to do the code tutorials where you can actually play with Split, play with these ideas in a sort of a sandbox where you're not actually affecting your own code base. That's the developer code stuff. Whether you want to learn more about progressive delivery from the progressive delivery thoughts, or whether you want to just kind of be able to either explain to yourself or to somebody else what is Split in a couple of minutes with the explainer video. I appreciate your time. I hope this was eye-opening and you can put this to good use in your own environment. Have a great day.